got your speech prepared?
Yeah, I'm already.
2025 is now convened. Pam, would you please call the roll?
Commissioner Slick?
Here?
Commissioner Alvarez?
Here.
Commissioner Stoudemire Wesley?
Present.
Commissioner Higgins? Chair Cruz?
Here.
Thank you.
Thank you. All right, I have a short announcement to read. As required by state law, Prosper Portland invites the public to access and attend this meeting in person. There's also a YouTube live stream video of the meeting, and the public has had the opportunity to arrange in advance to provide virtual testimony. The public may provide written testimony to the commission by emailing prospercommissioners@prosperportland.us. Again, prospercommissioners@prosperportland.us. All right, commissioner reports. Does anybody have anything they'd like to report this month?
Nothing for me.
Okay. All right, we're all good. I'll just say briefly that we're working feverishly on our executive director recruitment process, so we should have some news to report on that relatively soon. But that's the extent of my report this month. All right, so next we have the interim executive director report with our interim, Shabri Vickers.
Well, good afternoon, Chair Cruz and Commissioners. I'm pleased to join you here today, sitting in for, as you mentioned, Interim Executive Director Shea Flaherty-Bettine, who, along with several of our Prosper colleagues, is at City Council preparing to answer questions on our proposed budget. So appreciation to them and the work that they're doing as we divide and thrive. I'll begin my remarks out by saying last week I was happy to join the Office of Government Relations staff for the Portland Metro Chamber's annual Washington, D.C. fly-in. Along with partners from Seattle and Vancouver, BC, we spent several days advocating to federal officials, administration leaders, and members of Congress for the shared needs of the Cascadia region. Transportation was a primary focus with multiple discussions on federal support for the I-5 bridge replacement, I-5 Rose Corridor Improvement Project, and Cascadia Rail Corridor. We also had the honor to connect with Canadian trade officials to discuss the impact of federal tariff discussions and how we can advocate on behalf of small businesses in Portland and increase access to trade while reducing import issues and costs for business owners locally. I'm pleased to note that last Thursday, May 8th, staff from Prosper Portland attended the annual Oregon Association of Minority Entrepreneurs luncheon event, and at that luncheon, Prosper Portland received the 2025 Public Agency Award of the Year. This is truly a wonderful honor that absolutely speaks to the commitments to equity, our commitments to equity, and our longstanding partnership with OAMI and their leadership and membership. Kudos to the staff at Prosper who made that possible. On Wednesday night, May 7th, Prosper Portland's D&I director, Lisa Abwoff, spoke at Portland State University's grand opening of the new Science and Education Center building. Prosper Portland provided $2 million in funding for the recent renovation of the SEC building. The new 37,000 square foot space is designed to support innovation and entrepreneurship for the PSU facility, students, and our broader community, and our regional entrepreneurship ecosystem. So given our work with entrepreneurship and traded sector businesses, we are pleased to support this project and look forward to its continued success. We definitely want to congratulate Portland State on this milestone and note that we are excited for what the future holds. The application process for 3 TIF District Community Leadership Committees in East Portland is now open. Each district-specific committee's purpose is to advise Prosper Portland and PHB staff, the Portland City Council, and the Prosper Portland Board on the creation and implementation of TIF district action plans. And so Prosper Portland, PHB staff, along with Neighborhood Prosperity Initiative partners, will co-host open houses in each district over the next month, in addition to holding community drop-in hours. And so for more information, we invite folks to go to prosperportland.us and search CLC. I also want to note that as we celebrate Small Business Month this May, we're inviting folks to come and meet the Portland Office of Small Business team at a series of weekly launch events. And the events are taking place in all 4 of Portland City Council's districts. We hosted our District 1 event on May 6th and our District 2 event this past Monday. We have 2 remaining. On Tuesday, May 20th from 4 to 6, we'll be at Bar Carlo. That's for District 3. And on Tuesday, May 27th, from 5 to 7, we'll be at Hala Cafe in District 4. And as I mentioned at the start of my remarks, we are now in the middle of the budget review process, and I want to acknowledge and thank the entire Prosper Portland team for their work in preparing our fiscal year 25-26 proposed budget. I know we still have several steps to go before we get to the approved budget, but I do want to note how much we appreciate everyone for their efforts to prepare the budget and their commitment to the critical work we do all across the city. Thanks to all, with a special shout out to our CFO, Tony Barnes, and his entire accounting team, especially to Courtney Cohn, who will be joining us later today for this meeting. We have several new staff introductions this afternoon, and so I'd like to start by introducing two new members of our lending team. Jenny Riles is joining us as our Senior Business Finance Officer, focusing on business development. Jenny is a seasoned banking professional and community engagement leader with over 15 years of experience in portfolio management, corporate banking, and government relations. Growing up in North and Northeast Portland, she developed a deep commitment to financial empowerment and community advocacy. And Jenny's career spans high-level corporate banking roles at U.S. Bank, where she managed multi-billion-dollar corporate relationships and led strategic portfolio management initiatives. She has since transitioned into government and community engagement, serving as a senior coordinator at Espousal Strategies, where she worked to influence public policy and build meaningful connections between organizations and elected officials. With an MBA specializing in management and project management from Concordia University, Jenny continues to build a lasting legacy of leadership, service, and impact in her community, and we welcome you, Jenny. Next, we have Kathy Van, who is joining us as our Senior Business Finance Officer, focusing on our Property Fit and PSEF lending programs. Kathy is an accomplished, results-oriented professional with over 25 years of comprehensive experience in commercial banking. She comes to Prosper Portland from Commerce Bank, where she served as a senior credit analyst on the commercial banking team. And beyond the world of finance, she describes herself as a passionate foodie who enjoys exploring new cuisines, an avid reader with a love for continuous learning and a commitment to living a healthy lifestyle. Kathy values quality time with family and friends and strives to be present in every moment. As we begin to plan for the 6 new TIF districts in East Portland and the Central City, the Development and Investment Department is also growing. I'd like to introduce Angela Nguyen. Angela has joined the Green Team as Project Coordinator 2, where she will be supporting the new TIF districts in East Portland. And Angela is an experienced project coordinator with a focus on major transportation improvement and community engagement projects. She joins us from David Evans and Associates, where she served as a project coordinator. Angela is an alum of Oregon State University and University of Portland, and her professional path has included teaching in the Portland Public School System, as well as participating in community engagement and coordination work for DEA's Rose Quarter Project. Her background in education, transportation projects, and community involvement make her a fantastic addition to our team. Welcome. I'd also like to congratulate Kiana Ballo, who is moving to a new role on the Blue Team in Development and Investment Department. She will be working as a project coordinator too, supporting the new Central City TIF districts. Many of you already know her and of her stellar work in supporting TIF exploration process, which led to the approval of 6 new TIF districts here in our city. She's moving into the next phase of this work and will be working with the Central City PMs and relationship managers to establish action plan working goals and groups, along with those action plans to guide investment decisions over the next 5 years for each of the 3 districts, those being West Side, Lloyd Holiday, and Central East Side Corridor. She'll also be continuing her work on the Green Loop and other community-based projects. And we are so excited to have you staying on here with us, Kiana. I'd like to just ask everyone to welcome our new staff. Thank you so much. And with that, Chair Cruz, I am completing my update. Thank you.
Thank you for that great report, and welcome and congratulations to all of you. That's awesome. Happy to have you. So, okay, meeting minutes. Would somebody like to make a motion to approve the minutes of the April 9, 2025 meeting?
I so move.
Thank you.
I second.
Great, she beat you. All
Passed
right.
on the Zoom.
All those in favor?
Aye.
public comment for items not on the agenda. Do we have any comments?
Yes, we have Veronica Porras on the line with us on Zoom.
Okay.
Veronica, feel free to turn on your camera if you'd like.
Hello. Am I coming in okay?
Yep.
Okay. Can I start?
Yes, please do.
Yes, normally you'd have about 3 minutes.
Greetings, Board of Commissioners. My name is Veronica Porras. I'm the owner of Incognito.
Excuse me, but we can't hear you very well.
Hello. Is that better?
A little bit. Yeah, it's a little muffled. I don't know if,
Test 1, 2. Is that better? Test, test.
It's happening in the room because we can hear her very clearly on Zoom.
oh, huh, okay.
Continue?
There we go, that's better.
Okay. My public testimony is about developing support and building infrastructure for micro-factory dairy producers. We make a one-to-one low-sugar replacement of regular ice cream using rare sugars, allulose, tagatose, heavy cream, whole milk, and other natural flavorings. We are a small batch wholesale ice cream startup where our business plan is to be a micro-factory local distributor of wholesale ice cream for the Portland metro geographic area. We had the opportunity to sample our ice cream at My People's Market April 22nd, where Prosper Portland business liaisons John Beebe and Yvonne Smoker got to sample our ice cream along with Governor Tina Kotek. All were impressed with the flavor and texture and could not tell that it was low sugar and tasted like regular ice cream. The challenges we face to get our product to market is that the infrastructure to build a micro factory is non-existent. The grants that Prosper Portland offers tend to center on retail fronts, and the TIF districts tend to support retail fronts. There is not a category for micro factory for dairy producers who don't want to be a scoop shop. Furthermore, due to the regulation of ice cream production, you can't use a shared kitchen with other non-dairy food items. There is no shared kitchen available for just dairy producers in Portland. When reviewing the grants that Prosper Portland offers, the PIP grant is the closest that would match to our needs. However, renovations for a micro factory are higher than the 50-50 match. My ask is that Prosper Portland structure their TIF districts and grants that micro factory dairy producers be added to the type of businesses a TIF district would support. I'm meeting with a contractor Monday to get a quote for the 11 Northeast MLK Boulevard, which is in a TIF district, for cost renovations for a micro factory. Attached is a rough sketch of what it may look like, and the OAR for food establishments that we need to follow to be a microfactory ice cream manufacturer. If Oregon can have microbreweries for beer, we can have the same for ice cream. Thank you for your consideration and the opportunity to be heard. Thank you.
Thank you for your comments. We appreciate that. Okay, next up we have a regular agenda item. This is, this is a consent item. Pardon me. This is number 6, action item approving a modification of the proposed terms of a commercial property loan, commercial property loan program loan and a small business loan program loan to Creative Homies HQ LLC and Creative Homies LLC to finance construction and working capital needs of a project at 433 Northwest 4th Avenue. This is resolution number 7604. It's on the consent agenda. Would somebody like to make a motion to approve resolution 7604?
Motion to approve?
Thank you. Do we have a second?
Second.
Okay, thank you. All right, all those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Motion passes. Thank you. All right, next we have the regular agenda. This is number 7. It's an action item adopting budget amendment number 4 for the fiscal year beginning July 1, 2024 and ending June 30, 2025 and making appropriations. Courtney Cohen Interim Principal Budget Analyst. Hello, Courtney, will present.
Oh, I thought it was green. Sorry. Good afternoon, Chair Cruz, Commissioners, Director Vickers. I'm Courtney Cohn, Prosper Portland's Interim Principal Budget Analyst. I'll be presenting the fourth budget revision for fiscal year 24-25. Next slide, please. Okay, so just a reminder about why we do budget revisions. It's required by law that any changes to the budget that result in an increase in expenditure appropriations by fund be approved by the governing body. And Prosper Portland's appropriation categories are administration, economic development, infrastructure, housing, property redevelopment. And each of those categories includes many projects and programs that roll up to the appropriation categories. Next slide, please. Here are some highlights from this budget revision. There's a decrease in cannabis funding to align with the city's revenue projections. This allows Prosper to maintain the same cannabis fund levels for fiscal year 25-26. TIF debt proceeds increased and loan and property revenues were adjusted based on projections. There was an increase in the housing set-aside allocation based on the Portland Housing Bureau's projections. We are carrying over funding for various projects to next fiscal year, mostly because of delays. So those are showing up as decreases in fiscal year 24-25. And also interfund transfers increased to fund various projects and cover potential additional administrative expenses. Next slide, please. Here's where we are in the budget monitoring process. So the board adopted the budget in June. We've since revised the budget 3 times in August, December, and March. In April, the city revised its budget, so to align with the city's revision and our budget, our fiscal year 25-26 budget development. We are doing our 4th and hopefully our final budget revision. We will obviously continue to monitor the budget though through June to ensure that we are within our spending authority. Next slide, please. Overall, our resources changed. They went up by about $50,000. But first, you'll note the decrease in cannabis funding of $600,000. This relates to the update in the city's projected revenues. So we're taking that cut this fiscal year in order to maintain funding for next fiscal year. The rather large decrease in state and local grants mostly relates to carrying funds over to next fiscal year for state-funded infrastructure projects. So those are transportation improvements in the Central East Side and Broadway corridor. The TIF debt proceeds increased by about $3 million in North Macadam and about $600,000 in Gateway. Property income and reimbursements decreased based on updated revenue projections. Most of this decrease removes revenue for the post office garage, which is not yet operational. There was also a decrease in projected revenue from the inn at the convention center. Transfers increased mainly in order to consolidate resources within the source funds to help facilitate the James Beard Public Market and the Casket Building loan. Also, the Strategic Investment Fund transfers interest revenue into the indirect fund to cover potential administrative expenses. Okay, next I'll discuss changes in expenditures. Some of these slides I'll go through pretty quickly, so just feel free to stop me if it's too fast. Our first appropriation category is administration. This increases by about $400,000, mostly for human resources support and for recruitments. There was also a slight increase in city overhead charges and city debt management services. Next slide. For our economic development appropriation, there was a decrease by about $3 million. A large portion of this is for the Strategic Business Retention Fund, which includes a loan for Daimler. That is Daimler's electric vehicle builds out, and other potential business retention projects. So those are carrying over to next year. Also included here is carryover for business loan programs and the decrease to cannabis-funded programs. So you'll see that, or as previously stated, that a one-time cut of $600,000 was taken this fiscal year, so we're maintaining the cannabis levels for next fiscal year. But that cut was applied to Reimagine Oregon, took a hit of $400,000, and then the Inclusive Business Resource Network and Social Equity and Economic Development Grant Program, those each got cut $100,000. Next slide, please. Our housing appropriation line item increased by about $14 million to fund Portland Housing Bureau's housing set-aside. North Macadam increased by $9 million for an acquisition project. Interstate saw an increase of $5 million to align with the disbursement schedules for the Strong property and Carter Commons. Next slide. The infrastructure appropriation category decreased by about $6 million. This is mostly related to the street improvements in Central East Side, so for the OMSI master plan, and then the street improvements in Broadway corridor. These projects were funded with $12 million in state grants. We're carrying over half of those funds now in order to continue those projects into next fiscal year. Next slide. Our final appropriation category is property redevelopment, which decreased by $22 million. About $10 million is carrying over in Gateway for commercial property loans and special authority grants. About $8 million is carrying over in North Macadam due to the timing of the planned University Place development. $2 million is reclassified to real estate management contingency for Lentz Commons. And $2 million is reclassified in the Portland Clean Energy Fund as a transfer to River District to fund the Casket building loan. Slide. Finally, changes in other requirements. Transfers increased by about $5 million. $2 million, as I previously stated, is moving from Portland Clean Energy Fund in order to consolidate resources for the Casket building loan within River District. And $2 million will move from River District in order to consolidate resources for the James Beard Public Market within the Community Investment Program Fund. The remaining transfer amount allows us to potentially move interest receipts out of the Strategic Investment Fund and into the indirect fund in case the full budget there spends out. As previously stated, real estate management contingency added $2 million for Lentz Commons. We're holding those funds for potential future capital needs. And finally, contingency increases $9 million, mainly to carry over funds for Gateway into next fiscal year. That's it.
Great, thank you very much.
Welcome.
Anybody have any questions or comments? No? Commissioner Stoudemire Wesley, do you have any questions or comments?
No, nothing for me.
All right then. Well, would somebody like to, I guess we do actually have a resolution for this. Would somebody like to make a motion to approve resolution number 7605?
I think
adopting budget
Felisa's
amendment
also
number
on the
4?
line.
I'm sorry?
I think Felisa's also on the line.
Oh,
Yes, she's on the line.
oh,
I don't have any questions.
Oh, great.
But I will make a motion to approve the resolution.
oh, good, thank you. And welcome. I didn't realize you were on the line. Okay, great. Okay. Anybody want a second?
Second.
All right, all those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Okay, passes unanimously. Thank you. Thanks very much. Okay. Next, we have an information item. This is an update on City of Portland housing production strategy. And we have several guest speakers: Tom Armstrong, Bureau of Planning and Sustainability; Patricia Diffenderfer, excuse me if I butchered that, Bureau of Planning and Sustainability as well; Josh Roper with the Portland Housing Bureau; and Sarah Harpole is also here, but she is not presenting. So yes, but welcome. All right. Thank you for joining us.
Hi, good afternoon. Nice to be here. Thank you for having us. Chair Cruz and Commissioners, my name is Patricia Diffenderfer. I'm the Chief Planner, in the Bureau of Planning and Sustainability with the City of Portland, overseeing our long-range land use planning. And I will go ahead and start us off, do some opening slides, and then I'll hand the presentation over to Tom and Josh, who will present more of the detail. So if we could have the first slide, please, or next slide. So this presentation, we're going to provide some background. We're going to talk about the housing production strategy itself and provide an overview of the strategy. And then we're going to spotlight some key actions. I know one of the reasons, or one of the purposes for coming to present this to you was because obviously housing is super important. It's on everyone's mind, but it's also a way to contextualize, excuse me, I'm going to get a little water here. Thank you. A way to contextualize some of the work that that Prosper and the board is doing, and how those actions kind of fit into the broader strategy that the city has for facilitating housing production. So next slide, please. We're going to give a little bit of background. Next slide, please. So one of the things that we just wanted to share as a part of this presentation is that a lot of this work is work that is required by the state. The housing needs analysis is an analysis that is done, and then the accompanying housing production strategy, that is a new requirement. State law newly has required cities to also prepare a housing production strategy. The housing needs analysis is a supplemental document of the comprehensive plan, and it is where we do an exercise to evaluate the capacity within the city's zoning to accommodate the housing needs. So in the most recent housing needs analysis that was done, which was adopted in 2023, and it was for the year 2045. The demand for housing was around 120,000 units, and the capacity within the city's housing, within the city's zoning, could accommodate twice as much as that, about almost 240,000 units. And you can see in the graph here that these bar charts show where the housing units are currently, and then where the capacity is in the zoning. And so you can see that their city has sufficient capacity within its zoning, and that the highest demand for housing is within the central city and south, or historically has been. More recently, things are obviously a little bit different, but has been in the central city and the southeast Portland, which is also where we have most of the capacity to grow, as you can see from the bar charts here. Next slide, please. So this graph, just wanted to give you a sense of what the housing production has been in recent years. This graph shows the annual permit activity over the last 10 years. While permitting has obviously, as you can see on the right side of the chart here, has been significantly down in 2023 and 24 due to market conditions, Portland has averaged about almost 4,500 units per year from 2018 to 2024. And to meet our housing targets, based on the current estimates of housing demand, the city would need to produce more like between 5,000 and 6,000 units a year, which is more consistent with the number of units that the city produces annually during more robust development cycles and development years. That was the rate at which we were producing housing kind of in the post-Great Recession era. And yeah, so I think we'll go ahead to the next slide, please. So we very quickly just wanted to talk a little bit, this is kind of some of our standard slides that we present when we present this topic, is to just kind of show what are the ways in which the city influences housing development. And you can see here, depending on the level of affordability, there are different tools and different approaches to how the city helps facilitate housing production. You can see when, as it relates to the lower income housing, whether it's the 0 to 30 area median income or 30 to 60, predominantly in that 0 to 30, the primary tool is providing funding. For some of the, as you get to some of the more moderate income housing, the other incentives, and to some degree market rate housing, the other incentives are both a combination of financing for non-market rate housing and also incentives like density bonuses, zoning regulation bonuses, and incentives and tax exemptions and those kinds of tools. So the type of tool varies by the type of affordability, and this is something that Prosper, I'm sure you all know and well in your work. So next slide, please. If you could click again, please. Yeah, thank you. So again, you as a board are very well versed in this notion of what it takes to make projects feasible. As you're well aware, under current market conditions, the cost of building housing continues to exceed market rate rents, and this is causing a feasibility gap in many projects and is really one of the conditions that's contributing to why the city has not seen private development occurring in more recent years. So ensuring that we have sufficient zoning capacity, of course, is only one of the factors in determining whether development occurs, and financial feasibility, of course, is also very important. Next slide, please. So this was some analysis that was conducted as part of some recent work on different housing projects, specifically the inclusionary housing calibration study that was done. But we were trying to understand and assess what really would be needed to improve project feasibility. And you've probably seen this information before, but essentially it's really about costs being lowered. So for example, construction costs or total development costs being lowered to the tune of what you see here on the slide, reducing the cost of capital and investor risk, or market rates increasing, market rate rents increasing. Obviously, with our housing affordability challenges from a policy perspective, we would not want to rely on increasing rents to help make projects more feasible. So that leads us to think about what are some of the city actions that can be taken in order to improve project feasibility. And so you can see, obviously, increasing any financial incentives as we're all able to do so, reducing permitting approval times, and reducing code requirements and streamlining process are among the things that the city can do. Next slide, please. So this, the city has been working on addressing the housing need of the city and facilitating housing production for quite some time, particularly with a great focus over the last 10 years. This slide just shows some of the many different actions that were taken to address the housing, the housing need and housing production. Everything from declaring a housing emergency in 2015 to a number of different regulatory, zoning code, and other code regulations. As you can see, the residential infill project, which many of you probably know, is the project that allowed duplexes and triplexes and fourplexes within, and cottage clusters within otherwise single dwelling areas, to also instituting the inclusionary housing requirements, and then in financial tools to facilitate housing, both in the form of the city's housing bond and the Metro Housing Bond. More recently, in 2024, you can see there was the housing needs analysis and the housing production strategy were developed and adopted by the city, and a project that we call the Housing Regulatory Relief Project, which was a zoning code project that temporarily suspended a number, like 15 different zoning code regulations, in order to try to reduce costs of development, as you saw in that previous slide, contributing to that reduction in cost of development that might help improve the feasibility of projects. So that was a project that was adopted recently. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. So this is my final slide, and then I'll turn it over to Tom. But again, as we go into the housing production strategy, just wanted to talk a little bit more about what this is. So as I mentioned, this is a state requirement to ensure that we're not just planning for the housing units, but that we're taking very specific and concrete actions to facilitate housing production to address the housing need. The City Council adopted the housing production strategy in August of 2024. It contains 35 specific actions that are needed to address the housing needs of the city over the next 6 years. And this is what Tom and Josh will be going into a lot more detail. The state, as part of the process and as a requirement of the state legislation, the state has to approve every city's housing production strategy. The state did approve the City of Portland's housing production strategy in January of 2025. It was a conditional approval. We've since early this month, we have received final approval of the housing production strategy from the state. There are a number of different categories of the actions. Generally, they involve everything from zoning code and regulatory changes to incentives, funding, and strategies for acquiring land, preserving affordable housing, and partnerships that help create and generate housing. So with that, I will stop and I will turn it over to Tom.
Chair Cruz, Commissioners, good afternoon. I'm Tom Armstrong. I'm a supervising planner with the Bureau of Planning and Sustainability, and my team at BPS led the housing production strategy work. Next slide, please. But as Patricia explained, since 2021, the state has adopted new legislation and requirements that apply to cities around planning for housing that really go beyond just sort of zoning and development capacity to meet future needs, but to really look at sort of the full suite of city actions that can address housing production. And so we set up a process to develop this production strategy that was very intergovernmental within the city, and we coordinated closely with the Housing Bureau and Prosper Portland staff to develop these 35 actions that really fall into 8 different categories that represent the wide range of housing needs and housing actions that the city could take. Next slide, please. And, this just gives you a flavor of how those 35 actions break out across the different bureaus and programs within the city. And everyone has a little bit of a responsibility around promoting housing production. Next slide, please. And again, this is really focused on a 6-year action plan. And part of the new state requirements is more accountability for the state to hold the city's accountability for achieving those actions. And so the production strategy itself includes a schedule and lays out a schedule. We have a midterm 3-year report requirement to the state to show what we've achieved, what we're working on, any changes in strategies that we want to do. And so, there is this whole new accountability being built into the planning system. But what you see on this slide is some of the actions that were basically in process in 23 and 2024 that we have brought to fruition and adoption, and a couple of them you're familiar with in terms of creating new TIF districts and offering new middle-income financial assistance. We at the Bureau of Planning and Sustainability adopted a new land division code to try and simplify, creating new lots for development. We've also worked with the Portland Permitting and Development on their permitting regulatory reforms. Next slide, please. Some of the actions that obviously with a 6-year work program, we have more clarity in the short-term actions. But again, some of the actions that we're currently working on or expect to work on next fiscal year, these are actions that are related to, specific to Prosper Portland as a lead. Again, many of these actions span a lot of different bureaus, and each one has a designated lead and then support from other city bureaus. But as you'll see here, there is a big focus, and we'll get into this in a little bit, but supporting some of the catalytic big projects in and around the central city as a way of sort of boosting demand for housing, highlighting that Portland can do it and bring new projects online. We also have identified one of the things that we heard a lot through our public comments through this process was around land banking and creating a citywide land bank to work with developers and our nonprofit affordable housing developers to do a better job and a more coordinated strategy, and that's something that we've begun to work on. Next slide, please. Other actions, we at BPS are taking on a project to look at the zoning entitlements in the central city and looking at where we can fine tune those to increase the development capacity in the central city. We also are looking at opportunities along 82nd Avenue in conjunction with the rebuild of 82nd Avenue and the introduction of bus rapid transit along that corridor. Next slide, please. And then I think I'll turn this over to Josh. This highlights some of the Housing Bureau actions.
Okay. Good afternoon, Chair Cruz, Commissioners. Nice to meet all of you. I'm Josh Roper. I'm the Policy and Planning Director for the Portland Housing Bureau. I'm going to highlight just a few of the ways that PHB kind of intersects with this work. And I want to note something at the outset, which is, you might already be familiar with this, but the Pro Housing Grant is a $7 million grant that the city was awarded to do a number of these activities, which is very exciting. It's coming from HUD. It seems to be moving forward. And I'm going to try to highlight where that funding is kind of intersecting again with the work in a couple of places here. So there are a few items here, and these are all related to the Pro Housing Grant, which is why I bring it up. So the first is replacing the housing bond revenue source. So this is a big lift, but a small piece of it that has to do with the Pro Housing Grant is some money that is part of that grant that will go toward a communication campaign to tell the story about the successes of the bonds and the life-changing effects of the affordable housing development that was funded by those bonds. The preservation piece here, I'm going to say a little bit more of that when we get to the spotlight section, but it's a major focus of the Housing Bureau currently. And then the third piece is kind of interesting. It's launching an affordable housing listing service. So this would be a portal that the public could access to more easily figure out where affordable housing is available and apply to those units. Next slide. I think I'll turn it back to Tom.
Yeah. Some other short-term actions that we're looking at in terms of, as Josh said, leveraging other state and federal funding sources. This legislative session, state legislative session, we have been partnering with Prosper Portland staff around some of the infrastructure financing bills that are going on in the legislature, and with the Housing Bureau and the affordable housing funding that could become available. Another example is the one there on the bottom. Not only looking at, and this one is one that sort of goes beyond sort of thinking about housing in terms of production, but making our existing housing stock, I guess, more accessible, more utilizable to a wider range of houses. And so we worked with PBOT to identify some transit service increases so that some of those underserved corridors and housing may become more accessible, housing could be more accessible to a wider range of jobs through this increased transit service. And I think that's an example of where we were taking a more holistic view of housing than maybe the state requirements were in terms of specifically about production of number of units. And we as a city, we're trying to make this a more holistic strategy that addressed all types of housing issues. Next slide, please. And then some other ones, you know, we are, in addition to the work that we're doing in the Central City on zoning, we also have an ongoing project that looks at some of the zoning bonuses and incentives we offer outside of the Central City in terms of looking at how to encourage more units with a larger number of bedrooms, 2 and 3 bedroom units, or more accessible units. Because I think one of the things in our housing needs analysis that we identified is the need for more housing for larger households and for with an increasingly aging population and an increasing population of people with disabilities, the need for more accessible housing. And so that's one project that we're currently working on to offer more floor area, more building height to encourage the production of those types of units. Next slide, please. Looking a little further out in the out years of the program, you know, we have some actions around looking at how we as a city can better support mass timber and modular and more innovative housing types. We are looking at conducting a periodic review of the inclusionary housing program to make sure we're calibrating our incentives with the costs to comply with those programs, and looking at addressing a number of different housing issues like low carbon building policies, adapting to a changing climate, and some of the more accessible and aging in place strategies that influence our work. Next slide, please. Now we want to just spotlight a few of the key actions, and this is where we actually have an intersection between the Housing Bureau, BPS, and Prosper on a lot of these actions. Next slide, please. So as I mentioned before, you know, one of the key actions in this was identifying, I think it's 6 or 7 catalytic projects in and around the Central City. Ones that I'm sure you're familiar with, but just, you know, Broadway Corridor as being one of those key projects for really activating the Central City, and that's one where the city and Prosper are really in the lead there. Another one is the OMSI District Master Plan and helping support the implementation of that plan, especially through infrastructure development and new street construction of Water Avenue. Next slide, please. Another key one that we've put a lot of energy into lately is the office to housing conversions. And again, that's one that goes across bureaus in terms of how we permit that and looking at the code that applies to those conversions, as well as the work that Prosper has done to offer financing. And then we are also looking at other additional code and financial tools that can help support those types of projects. Next slide, please. Continuing, just want to acknowledge, continuing to improve our permitting system, bringing more of that work online, looking at opportunities to streamline that process, to speed up the process, and just doing a better job of tracking that performance, tracking the types of production that we're seeing, and to really, continue to work on that issue as well. Next slide, please. And then I think I'll turn it back over to Josh.
Thanks. Just wanted to highlight a couple of things PHB is working on. I mentioned already, maybe I'll go backwards here. I mentioned already the preservation piece. So again, this is a major issue for the Housing Bureau that we're concerned about. I'm sure you're hearing a lot of similar stuff. But I want to mention the Pro Housing Grant includes $350,000 for the development of a preservation strategy. So I think that's going to be helpful. And some of the problems that are being addressed, that we're trying to address, have to do with a mismatch between tenant incomes and unit rents as they're set out based on AMIs. And as you're all familiar with, right, operating expense increases that have kind of been more than expected, more than underwritten for. So insurance, security, staffing, utilities, some of the items that are flagged here. And then the top item here, land banking and social housing, I just wanted to share this mostly for awareness. Land banking is something that's baked into the HPS, the strategy document, but it's also a part of a new social housing planning process that council called for, city council. So council directed the city administrator, and it's gonna be through PHB, to essentially study social housing for about a year. So we're gonna come back to city council with a set of recommendations and some research toward the end of May, probably of next year. And that may be of interest to Prosper because some of this research is going to have to do with developments, projects that are, not just affordable. They're going to be a mix of affordable and closer to market rate or market rate units potentially. Again, in the grant, there's a few $100,000 for research and strategy development specifically around land banking. And there's also an RFP in development. We're expecting to execute a contract later this year. And that's specifically about the land banking piece of the broader social housing planning. But I did want to just mention that planning process is getting underway. We haven't actually started yet, but we're scoping it out now. So looking forward to that. Thanks. Slide.
I think that concludes our presentation, and we're happy to questions that you might have.
Great, thank you very much. Really appreciate the overview and update. We don't get that here very often about housing, and it's a big part of our mission, albeit it's not something that we deal with directly all the time. It's more on the funding side. So it's great to hear this. Does anybody have any comments or questions? Oh, you do? Great.
I have a question.
Please do.
Hi, this is Felisa. I'm sorry, I live in my car now. This is my life. But I did want to ask a question about so I think the gap, it would be helpful for me if somebody could walk through the gap per income level. So, the gap between the 4,000 units that we're building and the 5,000 units that we need, are those just 120% and below AMI? Like, how many units do we need to produce at each level to actually meet the need? And especially given the difference, I think is really helpful to understand. And then my second question is about when you build housing in the city of Portland. So I'm particularly very focused on this because of the TIF districts and the work that's going into the TIF districts. The one point of contact, if I wanted to construct and build housing today that is a mixture of market rate and some set below market rate, am I assigned one point of contact that gets me all the way through the permitting system to opening?
In terms of, this is Tom Armstrong. In terms of the financial gap by income level, I mean, we don't have that immediately available here, but it is in the housing needs analysis where we identify that, we break out that need by income level. And, you know, I would say that the need for the sort of lower income categories represents close to half of what we need if we want to maintain our income diversity that we have in Portland today, which is a goal, a value that we incorporated into the housing needs analysis. Obviously, the gap, the financial need and the difference between what it costs to produce a unit and what kind of rental income you get at a 0 to 30% AMI unit versus a 60 to 80% AMI unit, you especially need the deeper subsidy for those lower income categories. We don't really have that number available on a sort of per unit basis, but obviously, you know, the more you get into that sort of 80% AMI category and above under normal building conditions, we begin to see more market rate production in that in those income rate ranges. You know, the current market today in particular faces other challenges with respect to construction costs and interest rates that has really locked the construction market, especially here locally. I hope that helps. As for the one point of contact, I'm not really sure that's more of a permitting and development question, but we can certainly find out the answer and get back to you. You know, and I think we'll try and make clear what is a sort of a more private development that includes inclusionary housing units versus, say, a project that has more than that 10 or 20% affordable inclusionary housing, but maybe is a mixed income project where half of the units are affordable or even a fully affordable unit, and how PP&D treats those in terms of the one point of contact and the additional assistance you have in navigating the system.
All right, this is Patricia. I would add that I know that the single point of contact is something that PP&D is working on. I don't know the status of the single point of contact for, you know, specific types of projects like an affordable housing project, but what I do know is that there is a prioritization of the projects, and affordable housing projects are among the projects that are prioritized, so they are taken kind of ahead of the line, if you will, and you know, staff work on those based on that priority.
Thank you. Any other questions, comments?
I was hoping, because I think there is general lack of clarity on this topic, and I'm kind of looking at everyone because I'm not sure who's going to answer it. Could someone just state what is Prosper's role on housing within the city of Portland?
Yeah, thanks. Well, I think as Sarah comes up and offers some, I'll just state I really appreciate the presentation that really kind of called out at a detailed level what our role is, because I think that probably hopefully gets to the most granular aspect of it. I think kudos to you and the team for helping us move TIF through, because I think that's one of the major things that we are able to do to really start to signal and make that happen. And then I would say, and Sarah, I'd love to hand it to you after this, when I think about Lisa Aboaf and the work that she's doing and bringing in Will and others, looking at the middle income housing and the finance that we are able to create and support through that to me is a major part of how we would work amongst the other bureaus in our service area. And I would echo what Patricia said with regard to PP&D. I know they too are right now at City Hall talking about budget, and I think the budget constraints really are a part of how we look at that single point of contact, Felisa, that you mentioned. But Sarah, what might I be missing in that instance as well?
I would just echo that. We generally will participate in housing that is serving residents earning 80 to 120% AMI. In some instances, we partner with PHB on kind of commingled projects. But just as way of a few examples, we have modified our loan products, so it's very clear that middle-income housing is a viable use of those loan products. So it can be through investment of loan dollars. It can be through technical assistance and support, such as what we're doing at OMSI or Albina Vision Trust. Broadway Corridor, we obviously own and are working through a development agreement to move that project forward, and championing the resources from the state, whether it's infrastructure dollars or the revolving loan fund or lottery funds to be invested into those major catalytic projects. So it can look a scale, but generally within that 80 to 120% AMI.
Okay. So if I could summarize, we are involved through the funding and TIF work that we do primarily on market rate, and then through the housing set aside to PHB. And then PHB, you're responsible for generally affordable housing. Am I getting that correct?
Yeah, generally affordable housing development and preservation, and then we have some broader functions around tenant protections. We have a rental services office that works on that topic, and some other areas, but yeah, that's right.
And then, so does that mean, Patricia and Tom, your bureau, are you overseeing all housing in Portland? Because, you know, Prosper's work and PHB's work is really vital, and I want to emphasize that, but it also doesn't cover the entire city and may not necessarily have the kind of high-level overarching view on housing production for the city. So I was curious who oversees that.
So I would say what BPS's role is the long-range planning side. So it's everything from the comprehensive plan and having a comprehensive plan and a comprehensive plan map and zoning map that are up to date and facilitate housing, as we talked about, making sure that we have the zoning capacity. Our function is also making sure that the zoning code is not an impediment to housing development. So you've seen a number of examples of where we've undertaken projects to update the zones, everything from the single dwelling zones, which was the RIP project, to the multi-dwelling zones, the mixed-use zones. All of the different zoning categories that allow housing in the city have been revised and updated over the last many years to facilitate and really encourage as much housing production in those areas as possible. Also area planning, right? For example, we just did a plan, it was a joint land use and transportation plan for the area around the Montgomery Park building. It's the Montgomery Park area. And that involved taking underutilized industrial land that really had not had sort of viable industrial uses more recently, and envisioned that to be a more mixed-use place where both jobs and housing would be accommodated to the tune of 2,000 units or more in that area of total housing, with a minimum of 200 to 300 units of affordable housing. And that was also paired with an extension of the streetcar, the north-south streetcar, to extend to that area. So area planning projects where we look at how we can develop, create capacity for more housing, and also for more complete neighborhoods that are well connected by transit, and have create the environment in which investors and developers would want to develop in the city.
So that's really important work too from a planning perspective. And then is it correct that BDS, and I apologize if I'm getting the acronyms wrong because they may be outdated. So BDS is then in charge of overseeing the permitting and the code associated with housing. Is that?
So PP&D it's now the Portland Permitting and Development, PP&D, and they implement the land use regulations. So they implement the code. So the BPS develops the code and they implement the code, and they are tasked with doing the land use reviews, doing the permitting of development projects that come before the city.
Okay. So then I guess, not to be redundant, but then what knits all of these important bodies of work and the groups that are overseeing them, is there something or someone that actually sits above all of these groups and brings all of that work together collectively?
I would say that in some ways, the comprehensive plan and the housing needs analysis and the housing production strategy serve as a blueprint for the entire city. As Tom explained, the 35 actions within the housing production strategy have roles for, a lead role for a specific department, and then many department bureaus serve as support. So it is an organizing mechanism for the work that the city is doing around housing production. And I think also in our new government structure, the city administrator and our deputy city administrators who oversee service areas, they're able to bring bureaus together to prioritize and coordinate on different initiatives.
For anyone who doesn't know, we are all part of the same service area, right? So Prosper, PPND, BPS, PHB collaborate as a result of that too.
And I would think, because like this housing production strategy is coming out of sort of the land use policy element of state law, of the Department of Land Conservation and Development, it is more of a long-range planning function. At BPS, we see ourselves more as a convener, and it's more of a coordinator, collaborator role, as to provide that overarching view. But I wouldn't necessarily to say that it's more directive than that, and that it is more a collaboration among the various bureaus within the service area to achieve that, to both create that production strategy and then track that progress.
Great, I appreciate the background and the explanation, and I guess I'll get into a little bit of something that is my opinion. And my opinion is that housing is incredibly important, and Oregon and Portland, as you all know, has been in one of the worst housing situations in the US. And I think it warrants a group or an individual who actually is knitting all these efforts together. I am agnostic as to who and what that is, but I think we need it. And I would also say that, I think what worries me, being someone who works in housing and kind of tracks these numbers, is that, and Patricia, you talked through this a little bit in your presentation, but Portland was a sweetheart city for private money in 2016, and we hit peak production numbers of, I think, around 6,000 units per year. And last year, we had less than 900 units, I believe.
I believe we had about 2,300, 2,400 units.
Depends on what you count as a unit. We had, last year, we permitted about 2,000 units, but a big chunk of those, 1,200 of those, were affordable housing units coming out of the two housing bonds that we passed. So yes, about 800, 850 private investment units, and that's what you're touching on is the lack of private investment in the city.
Yeah, and I don't want to overly focus on private investment, but I think the reason why it is important is we just don't have enough public money to fund the entirety of our housing needs, and it's an impossible task if we start trying to climb that hill. And I look at the body of work. I read the housing production strategy when it came out, and it's clear to me that there is so much work being put into this. There are 35 efforts, each of which requires its own body of work to support it. And when I step back and look at it, I sometimes feel like we're dropping these pebbles on the scale, and the scale isn't tipping, and we keep putting more pebbles on, waiting for it to tip. And I keep wondering, when are we going to find that rock that makes that scale tip? And maybe part of the reason why I think it's so important that we find an individual or a group within the city to oversee this effort is because I'm hoping that person can be laser focused on finding that rock to help tip housing production in the direction that it needs to go.
I'll just say that I know that there's definitely an interest in having a cross-bureau team, that their main focus is to just ensure, I mean, it's happening perhaps one could say more informally, but something that's a more formal cross-bureau team that's focused on just implementing these actions and trying to see, measure the results and consider what others, maybe pivots the city needs to take in order to continue to try to, change the conditions that we have now. But obviously, there's so many macroeconomic conditions that are that factor in here that are things that not necessarily in the city's control. And so we're trying to find the levers that we have that to create the incentive and to instigate the development, if you will.
Yeah. And I guess as a market rate developer, and, I don't think it is the city's job to subsidize housing in the pit of the market. But there's an aspect, and there's plenty of articles and podcasts and books that have been written about this. So I know I'm not stating anything that anyone doesn't know, but there is a specific situation that we've created in cities like Portland and pretty prevalent in West Coast cities and some other cities that have made it particularly difficult so that when we recover from this current market downturn that's impacting the entire US, it's going to take us much longer to start producing housing, which is going to continue to kind of weigh on our ability to thrive as a region, which kind of then ties back to why I think this is important for Prosper, since we are the economic development agency for the city of Portland. And I know Felisa's had her hand up, so I don't want to keep talking. I'll let her talk.
Yes, and Chair Cruz, if I might, just before Felisa, you go, I neglected to mention just kind of some of the work that Prosper also does as we think about kind of that long-term workforce and how we actually build the things that we're doing. And so Prosper certainly looks at our business and workforce equity policies as we consider how we will do that. I think you were spot on about the public-private partnerships and really solutioning along those issues. When I think about the work we did at Broadway Corridor to go down and lobby, what we were lobbying for was truly a partnership with our private developer partner to look at how we could solution for the gap financing that will be needed to bring that to fruition. And, I certainly look to and appreciate the work that Lisa and Sarah and Will are doing where we can literally look at that general advocacy and our influence as the Economic Development Bureau for the city and consider ways to do things differently. Lobby Day was something that was absolutely different than what we have done in the past and wasn't about subsidized units, but really talking about how we build that intentional neighborhood and community that is both affordable right next to that middle income housing. And then I just want to lift up a lot of the work that Kay and his team have done around thinking about really creative finance tools, when you think about the middle income housing that we did with Short Stack and really their CLT and the quick way that they were able to build that modular housing was pretty amazing when we think about the residential conversion work with Casket Building in Old Town and some of the financing we've been able to do there with our strategic income, with our SIF fund. I think the team continues to show up, but I totally agree that kind of guiding light will help us take what you're calling the pebbles and move it forward in a way that can be really impactful to our needs. So thank you for your continued effort and sharing what is important from our board as well.
Lisa, do you still have a comment?
I do. I don't know if somebody else has already talked, so I don't know if somebody else has a comment, but so I agree with Michi on this sort of overarching, and the way that I have been thinking about this, and I found this presentation really helpful, and I've read that housing production strategy plan and some other components, but I think of each of this around the TIF districts. And so I sometimes think that we're trying to boil the ocean a little bit if you consider the city as a whole an ocean. So could we actually think about in the future how we have because the TIF has the 45% set aside for housing, right? And that is both affordable but also middle income, and then there's some preservation in some of the TIF districts. Is there a way that we actually have a sort of city Prosper project team to supercharge that development as the TIF districts move along, that is across this group that is here today to sort of figure out our best strategies to sort of put that on a little bit of steroids. And I would say our other partner that would be missing from that cross strategy team is the state, and the state lift bonds around sort of financing this whole show. And would it be easier to take a slice than to think about it as a whole city? I also am interested in sort of your all's perspective at the table. If you could pick who are presenting, if you could pick like the 3 things in your area that you feel like are the most urgent to accomplish to sort of kind of supercharge the city's housing production strategy in these TIF districts.
One quick note on the set aside, I just want to clarify the 45% is specifically affordable, and then Prosper can pull from that 55 remaining for non-affordable or mixed income projects.
Oh, perfect. Thank you.
This is Patricia. So Tom and I were just reflecting on an example, which is on 82nd Avenue. You may have noticed one of the actions is to kind of analyze the housing opportunities on 82nd Avenue. So given that this is obviously an important corridor, there's also a lot of transportation funding going into that corridor, and there's a community there that's concerned about the impact of different public investments in that area and wanting to make sure that the neighborhood, the current residents are stabilized and that there's affordable housing on that corridor in the future. One of the actions is to actually do an analysis and identify where there are sites that can lend themselves to development in the near term. What are some of the gaps, whether it's financial or other, that would help bring projects in that corridor to fruition. And one of the things that we're doing is actually partnering with Apano and some private property owners along the corridor we're applying for a Metro 2040 grant to look at the Eastport Plaza. It's a large, about 20-acre site that has different ownership, but ownership among people who are interested in seeing how the site can be developed more intensely and developed with a mix of uses that would include affordable housing. So those are the kinds of things where we're trying to rally around a priority area and across the bureaus undertake efforts that can help projects come into fruition in those areas. I think another important focus area is Central City.
Can I ask a question about that? Sorry to interrupt you.
Yeah, absolutely.
Would it be helpful to have a project team like that for each TIF district, or do you think 82nd is unique?
Yeah, I think that, Sarah, do you want to go ahead and jump in?
I can speak to our experience kind of looking forward in the Central City TIF districts. We are just kicking off our action planning process. So while that is a 15-member kind of engagement process by district to define the action plans, we're also mirroring that process with engagement with the technical advisory committee across our bureau partners. This is a ongoing relationship in many different initiatives, and so we have a lot of familiar faces coming back to the table again and again around these various initiatives. And so that body will come back to inform each TIF district strategy and the timing of whether it's infrastructure to support housing or direct investment into housing, along with our stakeholder engagement. I would also offer that each of those new TIF districts is anchored by a major development opportunity, whether it's the Lloyd Mall, OMSI, or the Broadway Corridor, and within, or AVT, which sits outside of a district. But those 4 strategic sites each have or will have a technical advisory committee assigned to them as well that is also working through as a team, whether it's to support infrastructure to unlock development, help work through permitting, and divide and identify housing opportunities. So I think in implementation, we have effectively stood those up and will continue to do so as well.
Agreed.
I noticed your comment about the new governance structure, and you mentioned the city administrator and how that might work. And I just wondered, what have you noticed so far about the new structure? Has it been helpful to you? Have you noticed much of a change in terms of the interaction between the bureaus? And what do you think so far?
I will just observe from my standpoint. I mean, I think the bureaus have always I'm a relative newcomer. I've been here 3 years in my role and in the city of Portland. But in my time with the city, the bureaus have always worked quite collaboratively. But I think under the new form of government where, you don't have bureaus under different commissioners, and we have a lot of direct contact with the deputy city administrator. Our deputy city administrator is Donnie Oliveira for the Community and Economic Development Service Area. And they're just his whole approach really, and is one of bringing the bureaus together to problem solve various projects. I think we can all attest to that. So I think that's how we're seeing it reflected in the day-to-day work that we do.
Great. Do you think that the deputy city administrator or someone acting in his stead or as an assistant or something might be able to play the role that Commissioner Slick was talking about as somebody kind of in an oversight capacity? And maybe he's already doing that. I know he's got his hands full. I talk to him every now and then. I know he's a busy fellow.
Yeah.
But maybe somebody in his office could kind of play that role too.
We can certainly take that back. I mean, I will say that the deputy city administrators have very limited staff, but
Yeah.
the staff that are in the Community and Economic Development Service area do kind of play that cross-bureau sort of coordination role. And we'll definitely take this idea back, this information back, and share it.
Yeah, and Chair Cruz, I'd offer, we meet at least once a week for kitchen cabinet meetings. And so literally we see each other so often, and we are literally talking through, I would say, kind of major strategic issues that we see, or large efforts that might happen, or things that we need just collaboration across. And that is in between all the phone calls, the emails, and the things in the midst of that. And truly, we're able to strategize even as we think about the conversation that's happening as we speak right now at City Council around budget, and us being able to actually do the things that we're mentioning. So I would say Donnie Oliver, to your point, has brought us together, and collaboration is probably one of his top things. I do think he's probably the person that's at least most readily able to serve in the way that you're asking. I will offer that with the transition of city government, I think there's a lot that we're also just working through in the kind of storming and forming stages there. And so, yeah, I think additional support is always great, but from a position standpoint, that's probably the best location because it houses all of the bureaus that actually would do the work. Yeah.
I don't mean to sound like a broken record, but to me, this is just so incredibly important. Like, if we can't house our workforce, how do we expect our businesses to function? How do we expect our city to grow? So to me, it warrants a person, half a person. Like, I think it deserves that level of attention. I also think that there are things that we can be looking at that would benefit affordable housing, workforce housing, and market rate housing. And I know recently the mayor and the governor put forth a bill that would basically waive SDC fee waivers for the first 3,000 or 5,000 units, first 3 years. And I thought that was a really great, bold move that benefits everybody. It benefits affordable all the way through market rate. We could look at how we don't lay off more staff in PP&D so that when housing production does come back, we actually are able to process those permits in a timely manner. A moratorium on any policy that will make housing more expensive or more difficult to permit for 3 years. Like, there are things that we can do that would benefit the TIF districts, it would benefit housing across our city that I think we should be talking about.
Any other comments or questions? Anybody online like to say anything? Okay. Well, thank you very much. This is a great presentation. Yeah, this is a great presentation. We really appreciate it. Very informative and lots of good things to chew on and think about going forward. So thanks very much for coming.
Thank you. Thanks for your time and the discussion. Thank you.
Great. So now we're going to go to an executive session. And I have a little notice to read for that. So please bear with me. The Prosper Portland Board will now meet in executive session pursuant to Oregon Revised Statutes 192.6602H to consult with counsel concerning the legal rights and duties of a public body with regard to current litigation or litigation likely to be filed. And Oregon 192.6602E to conduct deliberations with persons designated by the governing body to negotiate real property transactions. Representatives of the news media and designated staff are allowed to attend the executive session. All other members of the audience are asked to leave the room. Representatives of the news media are specifically directed not to report on any of the deliberations during the executive session. So we'll wait until folks are gone. So, nope. What's that? Yeah. Yes.